The sound that shattered Thomas Bennett's world wasn't the crash of thunder or breaking glass. It was the broken whisper of his 6-year-old daughter, "Please don't hurt us anymore." He had returned early from his month-long business trip to London, his Italian leather shoes silent against the marble floors of his Manhattan penthouse. The familiar scent of expensive candles and fresh orchids filled the air, but something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, too still, like a museum after hours. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, let's begin. Thomas set down his briefcase, loosened his silk tie, and listened. From somewhere deep in the apartment came a sound that made his blood freeze. Soft sobbing, barely audible, but unmistakably his daughter's voice. Following the sound through the hallway lined with abstract paintings worth more than most people's homes, Thomas stopped at the entrance to the living room. What he saw there would haunt him forever. Little Sophie sat huddled on the cold marble floor, her once pristine white dress now stained and torn. In her trembling arms, she held her baby brother James, barely 9 months old, his face red from crying. The child's tiny fists clutched at his sister's dress, as if she were his only anchor in a storm. "Please," Sophie whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. "Please don't hurt us anymore. We'll be good, I promise. James will stop crying." Standing over them like a predator was Catherine, Thomas's second wife. The woman he had married after losing his beloved Elena to complications during James's birth. Catherine's perfectly styled blonde hair caught the light from the crystal chandelier, her red designer dress immaculate, her makeup flawless. But her voice was pure venom. "Shut up, you little brat," she hissed, raising her hand. "If you wake the neighbors again with your whining, I'll—" "Stop!" Thomas's voice cut through the air like a blade. Catherine spun around, her expression shifting in an instant from cruel fury to sugary sweetness. "Darling, you're home early. The children were being difficult." Thomas stepped forward, his hand shaking as he reached for James. The baby felt impossibly light in his arms, his small body trembling with exhaustion. When had his son become so thin? When had those dark circles appeared under Sophie's eyes? "Come here, sweetheart," Thomas whispered to his daughter, but Sophie flinched away from his outstretched hand. The rejection hit him like a physical blow. His own daughter was afraid of him, or perhaps afraid to trust anyone at all. Catherine moved closer, her perfume cloying as she placed a manicured hand on Thomas's arm. "You look tired, darling. Why don't you rest? I'll handle the children. They've been so difficult while you were away, crying, making messes, disturbing my book club meetings. Children need discipline, don't they?" But Thomas was no longer listening to her words. He was seeing, really seeing, for the first time in months. Sophie's wrist bore the yellowing remains of finger-shaped bruises. James's clothes hung loose on a small frame. Both children watched Catherine with the hollow-eyed wariness of prey animals. "How long?" Thomas asked, his voice barely controlled. "How long what?" Catherine's smile never wavered. "How long have you been hurting my children?" The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "I would never hurt them. They're just fragile, like their mother was." The mention of Elena sent white-hot rage through Thomas's veins, but he forced himself to remain calm. For 9 months, he had buried himself in work, traveling constantly, signing deal after deal, building his empire while his children suffered in his absence. He had trusted Catherine to care for them, believed her gentle facade, ignored every warning sign because it was easier than facing the truth. He had failed as a father. That night, after Catherine retired to her room with a bottle of wine and promises that tomorrow would be better, Thomas sat in his study with Sophie and James. His daughter perched on the edge of a leather chair like she might need to run at any moment, while James finally slept peacefully in his father's arms for the first time in months. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Are you really staying this time?" The question broke something inside him. "Yes, baby girl. Daddy's staying, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again." But even as he made the promise, Thomas knew Catherine wouldn't give up easily. Over the next few days, he watched her carefully, documenting her behavior, gathering evidence. He discovered the locked bedroom doors, the watered-down formula that had left James malnourished, the threats whispered when she thought no one was listening. The breaking point came when Thomas found a meeting transcript on Catherine's phone. Discussions with her lawyer about accessing Elena's trust fund, about having Thomas declared an unfit father, about gaining full control of his children and his fortune. The children weren't just being abused. They were being used as pawns in a calculated scheme. Thomas called his attorney, James Morrison, a man who had been with him since his first startup. "I need you to come over tonight," Thomas said. "Bring everything you have on family law and child protection." The confrontation came 3 days later in the marble-floored dining room, where Catherine had served so many perfect dinners to unsuspecting guests. Thomas sat across from her, his decision crystal clear in his mind. "I'm filing for divorce," he said simply, "and I'm getting a restraining order to keep you away from my children." Catherine's mask finally fell away completely. "You think you can just throw me away? I've sacrificed everything for this family." "Sacrificed? You've terrorized my children. You've starved my son. You've beaten my daughter." "Discipline," she screamed. "They needed discipline. And what would you know about it? You were never here, always flying off to your precious meetings while I dealt with their crying, their messes, their constant needs. Then you should have told me you weren't capable of caring for them. Instead, you chose to hurt innocent children." Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Innocent? They're living reminders of your precious Elena. Every time I look at them, I see her face, hear everyone talking about how perfect she was, how much better she was than me. I was supposed to be enough. I was supposed to be the one you chose. I chose to trust you with the most precious things in my life," Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. "And you chose to abuse that trust." The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper who had worked for the family since Elena was alive, testified about the nights she found Sophie sleeping in closets, about James's constant hunger, about Catherine's threats. The photographs Thomas had taken of the children's injuries spoke volumes. Sophie, with the help of a child psychologist, found the courage to tell her story to the judge. Catherine fought viciously, hiring expensive lawyers, claiming Thomas was an absent father who knew nothing about child-rearing. She painted herself as a devoted stepmother overwhelmed by the responsibility. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her true nature revealed itself when she screamed at Sophie during the custody hearing, calling Elena a dead woman who should have stayed in the ground where she belonged. The judge's decision was swift and final. Catherine lost all parental rights and was ordered to stay away from the children. The investigation into her financial schemes led to additional charges of attempted fraud and conspiracy. As the bailiff led Catherine away in handcuffs, she turned back to Thomas one last time, her face twisted with hatred. "You think you've won? You think you can erase what I've done to them? Those children will never trust you completely. You failed them once, you'll fail them again." But Thomas was no longer the man who had walked away from his responsibilities. He was a father who had learned, at almost too high a cost, what really mattered. The healing began slowly. Thomas moved his office to his home, declining travel, restructuring his business, so he could be present for every meal, every bedtime story, every moment his children needed him. Sophie gradually stopped flinching when he reached for her hand. James learned to laugh again, his bright giggles filling the apartment that had been silent for too long. They planted a garden on the penthouse terrace in Elena's memory, tomatoes and sunflowers, herbs and strawberries. Sophie named it Mama's Garden, and together they tended it, watching life grow from what had seemed like barren soil. One evening, as Thomas helped Sophie tie stakes for the tomato plants while James played in the dirt nearby, his daughter looked up at him with eyes that no longer held fear. "Daddy," she said, "I'm glad you came home. I'm glad too, sweetheart. And I'm never leaving again." As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of hope, Thomas held both his children close. He thought of Elena, of the trust she had placed in him, of the promise he had almost broken but ultimately kept. Catherine had been wrong about one thing. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt. It took time, patience, and unwavering commitment, But love could heal even the deepest wounds. The tomatoes that summer were the sweetest they had ever tasted. Justice had been served not just in the courtroom, but in the quiet moments that followed. In Sophie's returning laughter, in James's peaceful sleep, in the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. Thomas had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the trust of a child, the sound of their laughter, and the promise of tomorrow in their eyes. In the end, love had triumphed over cruelty, truth over deception, and a father's awakening had saved not just his children, but himself. This story shows us that it's never too late to stand up for those who cannot protect themselves. If this tale of redemption and justice touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of love and courage. Together, we can spread awareness about protecting the most vulnerable among us. Thank you for listening, and remember, every child deserves to feel safe and loved. See you in the next video.